Elena had always known that wealth did not equate to warmth. At 27, she lived in a marble palace where every surface gleamed, every step echoed, and every conversation with her 62-year-old husband, Gregory, felt like negotiating with a ghost. Gregory, once a powerful man of industry, had grown colder and more withdrawn since the car accident 3 years ago, an accident that left him with a limp, a tremor in his left hand, and, most devastatingly, a diagnosis that ensured he could never father children. Their marriage had always been a transaction more than a romance. Elena was the daughter of a diplomat, raised in boarding schools and marble dining halls. Gregory had offered her security, status, and a life free of financial concern. What he couldn't offer, what Elena quietly buried within herself, was touch. Intimacy, the feeling of being wanted, not owned. When the new gardener arrived, Elena didn't even notice at first. His name was Alex, tall, quiet, olive-skinned with rough hands and soft eyes. He spoke little, worked hard, and seemed to disappear the moment the task was done, but it was in the way he tended to the roses, gently, reverently, that Elena first felt the stirrings of something dangerous, something alive. She began to walk the garden path more often. Sometimes she would ask Alex questions about the soil, the flowers, the changing seasons, questions she didn't really need answered. He would look up, startled at first, then reply with a nod or a soft-spoken sentence. His voice was low, careful, like someone who had spent years listening more than speaking. One afternoon, Elena reached out to touch a thorn stem, only to prick her finger. Alex, who had been pruning the hydrangeas nearby, rushed over and took her hand gently in his. Their eyes met. It was a moment no longer than a breath, but in that instant, something cracked, not in the world, but in her, a fracture of longing, a breach in a dam built too high for too long. The first kiss happened during a summer storm. Rain pelted the glass of the greenhouse, turning the world outside into a blur of motion. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Elena had gone to find Alex, claiming she was checking on the dahlias. He had turned around, startled, raindrops on his shoulders. Neither spoke. She stepped closer. He didn't move, and when their lips met, it was not timid, it was surrender. That night, they crossed a line neither could uncross. The days that followed were a dance of silence and stolen glances. The security cameras around the estate had long gone disused. Gregory never checked them. And Elena knew exactly which corners remained unseen. The garden became their sanctuary, beneath the willow tree, inside the old potting shed, in the lavender fields at dusk. Every encounter burned with risk, and yet, it was the only time Elena felt truly alive. She began writing again, in a small, leather-bound journal she kept hidden beneath her pillow. She scribbled thoughts too dangerous to speak aloud. I have never been touched this way. I have never been looked at as if I were more than porcelain. And yet, Alex remained distant at times. After their encounters, he would linger for a moment too long before slipping away. There was a sadness to his eyes, something haunted, that Elena didn't dare probe. Perhaps it was shame, or fear, or something else entirely. 2 months passed before the nausea came. At first, she thought it was stress. Then came the missed cycle, the trembling hands, the silent prayers to no one. The test in the bathroom, 2 lines. Clear, definite. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just sat on the floor, palm over her stomach, heartbeat loud in her ears. Then she found Alex in the garden, trimming back the vines. I'm pregnant, she whispered. He dropped the shears. Silence stretched between them, thick and oppressive. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, took her hands, and held them tightly. She felt him trembling. We have to leave, he said, now, before anyone finds out. In that moment, Elena understood 2 things. That she had never felt so alive, and that something in Alex's voice hinted at a truth she had yet to uncover. The storm didn't break with thunder, but with a legal notice. Elena had nearly completed her plan, bags packed beneath her dresser, fake IDs arranged by a contact in the next town, and enough cash from discreet withdrawals to buy their anonymity. She and Alex were set to leave after one final night together in the greenhouse, where their affair had first bloomed under mist and moonlight. But fate, in its cruel precision, has a way of cutting through even the thickest fantasy. Gregory Callahan, her husband and the master of the estate, had announced during breakfast that he intended to revise his will. His health, never robust since the accident, had taken a quiet downturn. He wanted to ensure that Elena, his young, beautiful wife, would be provided for. And so, as part of the legal procedure, the family lawyer suggested routine DNA confirmation to protect the estate from future claims. Gregory had nodded in weary agreement. Elena had smiled faintly, hiding the storm inside her. Elena, believing their secret was perfectly concealed, had no reason to panic. Alex had been careful, no one had seen them. But that very afternoon, he vanished. His quarters were left tidy. The small wooden cross he kept by his bedside was gone. His phone, always left charging on the kitchen shelf, was now silent. No note, no message, just absence, as chilling as a locked door in a burning house. The results arrived 3 days later. Elena was pregnant. That, no longer a suspicion, became a declaration, but the second page of the report was what shattered her world. The fetal DNA was compared to Gregory's as part of a legal standard. And while Gregory was not the father, of course not, he was genetically a direct relative. She read it once, then again, the numbers did not lie. The child inside her was Gregory's grandchild. Elena stumbled back from the table, her hand pressing over her abdomen. A sickness surged, not from the pregnancy, but from the implications. Her affair had not been with a stranger, not with a simple employee, but with blood, family. She tried to call Alex, her fingers trembling against the screen. Voicemail. She tried his email. The messages bounced. She went to his quarters again, pulling open drawers, overturning sheets, as if he might be hiding beneath the furniture. Nothing. Only a single book remained, The Count of Monte Cristo. On the last page, a line underlined in pencil, wait and hope. That night, she confronted Gregory. The fireplace crackled in the background, throwing long shadows across his face. He didn't look surprised when she held the report up to him. Only tired. Alex, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, is my blood, from another life, from a mistake I never dared to claim. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse or question. He simply looked at her. And for a moment, Elena couldn't tell if his expression was grief or victory. She stepped back, her heart pounding not just with betrayal, but with something deeper, something grotesque. The man she had loved, who had made her body feel awake for the first time in years, was the secret son of the man she had married. She was carrying Gregory's heir, a bastard's child, a twisted echo of legacies tangled in deception and flesh. Elena sat on the bathroom floor that night, staring at her reflection in the glossy tiles. She whispered to herself, barely audible over her own heartbeat, "What have I done?" But the answer didn't come, because it had already taken root inside her. The scandal did not erupt, it seeped, like spilled ink across silk, slow and irrevocable. It began with whispers in the corridors of privilege. Someone, perhaps a clerk, perhaps a nurse, leaked the news of the DNA test. Within days, society pages were buzzing with speculation. Then certainty. Elena Callahan, wife of the reclusive magnate Gregory Callahan, was pregnant, and the child was not her husband's. But the true shock, whispered like a curse behind manicured hands, was that the unborn child was Gregory's grandchild. The revelation tore through the upper circles of power like lightning across a clear sky. Gregory, who had spent decades cultivating the image of stern wealth and discreet dignity, called a press conference in the gold-paneled ballroom of their estate. Cameras rolled as he stood beside Elena, pale and expressionless. He placed a hand on her back, a gesture that felt more like possession than comfort. "My wife has made a grave error in judgment," he began, voice low, perfectly measured. But this family believes in grace, in forgiveness. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then came the final blow. The child she carries will not bear my name. I wish her peace, but this matter is closed. With that, Elena became a ghost in her own home. The mansion that once shimmered with guests and warm conversation grew silent. Staff avoided her, friends stopped calling, she ate alone, walked alone, carried her growing burden in silence. Each hallway echoed with the sound of betrayal. She wandered through the gardens like a widow in mourning. But it wasn't Gregory she mourned. It was Alex, vanished like mist. Desperation turned into resolve. Elena hired a private investigator, sparing no expense. Yet every trail led nowhere. No bank account, no passport, no digital footprint. It was as if Alex had never existed. The only trace left behind was the child in her womb, now strong enough to kick against her ribs. And then, a letter. It arrived from Mexico, handwritten, the ink smudged slightly with haste. There was no return address. Just a single sheet inside. Elena, I never meant for this to happen. I came to see him. Just once. My mother died with only his photo on her wall and no name on her lips. I had nothing but that image, and a question that haunted me. Then I saw you. I didn't know who you were. Not at first, but I stayed for you. Even when I realized the truth. I couldn't stop. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I did. Forgive me, Alex. Elena's hands shook as she read. The paper trembled like a wounded bird. Her vision blurred, not from the tears alone, but from the overwhelming collision of love, loss, and the monstrous irony of fate. In that moment, the child inside her stirred for the first time. She gasped, life, not sin, not shame, not legacy, life. That night, she sat by the window, bathed in moonlight, and wrote in her journal. Her handwriting was steadier than her voice had been in weeks. It wasn't his fault. He didn't choose to be born in shadows. And this child is not a mistake, not a scandal, not a curse. He is mine. He is love's last truth. She closed the book and pressed it to her chest, breathing in the silence. Outside, a single bloom had opened on the old magnolia tree, out of season, out of time, but still, it bloomed. So would she. The courtroom was cold, not from temperature but from intention. The weight of legacy, betrayal, and unspeakable bloodlines hovered like a fog no voice dared pierce. Gregory Callahan sat straight-backed in a charcoal suit, more granite than man. On the opposite side, Elena, visibly pregnant now, wore a muted blue dress, her hands resting protectively over her belly. Despite the tabloids, the whispers, the isolation she had endured, she held her head high. Because inside her, a truth was kicking, breathing, growing. Gregory had come prepared. As always, he brought his new will, revised with haste and cruelty. Every cent of his empire, properties, businesses, art collections, even the vineyard, was to be donated to a charitable foundation established under his own name. Not a single dollar for Elena. Not a single mention of the child. Elena's lawyer stood and spoke first, calmly laying out the request for divorce and petitioning for acknowledgement of paternity and the unborn child's inheritance rights. Gregory remained silent until his turn. When he rose, he didn't look at Elena. He looked at the judge. I will not allow a child born of incest to carry my name. He said, no rage, no raised voice, just cold steel and shame masquerading as moral superiority. Let her find dignity somewhere else. The room tensed, but Elena's lawyer didn't flinch. They unveiled evidence Gregory had long buried. Regular wire transfers made to a woman named Clara Reyes for over 2 decades. A woman who died in poverty despite the quiet charity. This, the lawyer said, holding up the documents, is financial acknowledgement. He may not have signed a birth certificate, but he funded her life. He knew. The judge examined the records in silence. A pause that felt biblical. The decision came by noon. Alex, though never publicly claimed, had been financially and intentionally supported by Gregory for decades. Under the law, that counted, and because of that, Elena's child, Gregory's grandchild, was a legitimate heir. Gregory didn't speak, he didn't wait, he simply stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out of the courtroom. Cameras caught him outside, but he said nothing, a monument crumbling inward. Inside, Elena stood slowly, her lawyer whispered something to her. But she barely heard, her gaze was fixed forward. Steady, she walked out not as a disgraced wife, not as a scandal, but as a mother who had reclaimed her child's future. Outside the courthouse, a figure waited. He wore a faded cap, his back slightly hunched, fingers nervously intertwined. When she reached him, he didn't speak, he simply held out his arms. And she walked into them. No words, only forgiveness, only a shared ache, and a fragile promise that whatever had shattered behind them, something tender had begun to grow ahead. 2 fathers, 1 house, 1 unborn child destined to break the cycle. The garden, somewhere, would bloom again. The wind carried the scent of jasmine and rosemary through the wooden shutters of the small cottage nestled at the foot of the hills. A year had passed since the firestorm of scandal, betrayal, and revelation that once defined Elena's name. Now, she moved through quiet mornings and sun-drenched afternoons with a kind of stillness that could only be earned through surviving chaos. She lived not in a mansion, but in a humble home with clay tiles and a backyard that pulsed with color, roses, lavender, marigolds, and rows of vegetables carefully nurtured by hands that once trimmed aristocratic hedges. Alex was always outside by sunrise. Dirt under his nails, a sun hat shading his tanned face. The same quiet grace he had shown in their first stolen glance. But now, he whistled as he worked, often glancing toward the window where Elena rocked their baby boy, humming lullabies that had no words, only warmth. The child, named Matteo, was full of laughter and light. His eyes, almond-shaped and curious, mirrored Elena's depth, but his mouth curled in the same half-smile that had once disarmed her in a storm-drenched greenhouse. He grew among the herbs and petals, his steps wobbly but determined, his fingers always reaching for life. They didn't have wealth, not anymore, but they had peace, they had truth, and every morning Elena whispered to Matteo, "You were born from a love they couldn't understand. But we do." Elena told him stories under the apricot tree, not of kings or castles, but of seeds, and soil, and a gardener who waited in silence until the flowers taught the world to listen. There were no crowns in her tales, just hands that healed and hearts that remembered. One breezy afternoon, a letter arrived from a solicitor's office. Elena held it with the careful dread of someone used to bad news disguised in formality. She read it twice before speaking. Gregory Callahan was dead, a quiet death in his sleep. The man who had tried to erase both son and truth had made a final gesture. He left a parcel of land to the child born from the affair. A vineyard, once tended by Gregory's father, abandoned for decades but now passed on to the blood that had once threatened his legacy. Elena didn't cry, she didn't rejoice, she simply folded the letter, pressed it against her lips, and whispered something no one heard. Weeks later, they visited the land. The vines were wild, unruly, wrapped around memories. Alex walked ahead with Matteo on his shoulders, the boy giggling at butterflies and sunbeams. Elena followed slowly, her fingers brushing against old wooden posts, half-buried stones, and weeds that once crowned empire. When they reached the center of the field, Alex knelt. He lowered Matteo to the ground and held him close. "This," he said, voice soft, "was where my grandfather planted hope. And now, so will we." Elena sat beside them, the earth warm beneath her. She looked into Alex's eyes, not the lover she once ran from, but the man who stayed, scarred yet whole, for the first time in years. There was no fear in her gaze, no shadow of shame, only sunlight. Matteo clapped, then laughed aloud, a bright, clear sound that scattered birds into flight. And in that vineyard, where blood had once been a curse, life blossomed from the roots of truth. no longer a scandal, no longer a secret, only a family, finally planted where they could bloom.